medicine path. And tonight we have Richie with the Boga. I begin again healing. So, you know, I met Richie a few months ago back, and we've stayed connected over the last few months. And I kind of wanted to get him on tonight because, this is a medicine here that's pretty powerful. A lot of healing effects, a lot of healing benefits, and sometimes a little scary to some of us in this plant medicine community, the things we've heard about it. But let's go ahead and introduce Richie tonight and tell us a little bit about yourself, Rich.
Hi, and Mark, I want to thank you for inviting me.
No problem.
So, what first comes to mind is that it's so interesting how there are so many people now introducing different psychedelics to the mainstream. There's probably thousands of psilocybin assistants, and there's only, I don't even know if there's a handful of Iboga providers sharing this particular medicine with people. I can't hear you.
No, go ahead. I'm listening to you.
Okay. And so, I mean, that's just the first thing that came to mind, that I'd love to see more people sharing this medicine to people that have maybe heard about it even, and it's kind of Ibogaine known for being very expensive and dangerous. And I want to cut through those conceptual frameworks. I've been working with Iboga for 29 years. And although I know, primarily with addiction interruption, there has been serious incidences at centers and underground, working with, full-fledged addiction interruption. Somebody comes to IB, medically compromised, doing 3 grams. In my opinion, it takes someone quite trained, well-trained medically, to be able to work with an addict. But I know that there are providers that are EMTs, or they're medically savvy and they have the capacity. I know that there'll be some people in the Ibogaine community that will disagree with me and insist that it's absolutely essential to have a doctor on board. But I know of nurses that do work and people that are medically savvy. So, and the other thing I wanted to share, I've done hundreds and hundreds of sessions and therapeutic intentions for everyone to receive an EKG. But if the EKG indicates that there aren't any red flags, and they're looking for a couple of specific red flags when it comes to doing Iboga, then Iboga is inherently safe. And in 29 years, I haven't had an incident. The other thing is, do you want to ask me something, or?
Now, yeah, let me ask you something quickly about that, because is that the most dangerous aspect of this medicine? Is the cardiovascular, is the heart?
Oh yes, indeed. Yeah, particularly it's in layman's terms, it's the electrical current, it's the QTC, and if the QTC is prolonged, Ibogaine temporarily prolongs it,
right?
And it's possible, not very often, but it is possible that it can bring the heart into arrhythmia, and that's not what we want. But it doesn't apply to the psychospiritual and therapeutic sessions when a person's really healthy and much less medicine, because we're not needing to overwhelm the symptoms of withdrawal. When grams of heroin does Ibogaine, one of the alkaloids, the active alkaloid located in Tabernacle Iboga, they literally overwhelm the symptoms of withdrawal. They don't go through any symptoms of placed into a pre-addictive state. There's a metabolite 36 hours after they take Ibogaine, which fills up the opioid, the alcohol, the nicotine receptor sites,
Right.
and they're left in a pre-addictive state without having to feel that 1,000 chipmunks are gnawing at every bone in their body. And they're left with choice again. Not to say that that's when the work begins. And there's a lot of people in their 20s and 30s, particularly into a pre-addictive state by doing Ibogaine, and they're not willing to address the issue as to why they became addicts in the first place. 3 days, 3 months later, they're going to relapse. Addiction, from what I've seen from the conversation during all these years, has so much to do with abandonment from the same-sex parent. About 60% of people and their moms and dads and sisters. Me, I discovered that the person has an abandonment issue, usually some kind of an emotional and or physical break with the same sex, and then about 20% with the opposite sex parent. And then there's about 15 or 20% of the people who have great parents, but they're the type of personality that will jump out of a plane, or they'll shoot up heroin, whatever like they fall in love with, they'll become addicted to. It's a sort of personality type, and that's about 15 or so percent. So, I mean, that's just after spending 29 years on the phone. At about the talking to people, 6-7 days a week for hours and hours, parents and so on, I began to feel that I was talking to the same. Put it to the test by asking the person on the phone, do you have an issue with your dad or mom, depending upon who it was, and usually the jaw would drop and there would be silence on the other end, and then it confirmed that was the case.
Right.
It's really scary, especially for a young addict who has had the propensity to run away from themselves. Mm-hmm. Like, let's say a 25-year-old guy does Ibogaine, they're not going to really go that deep. They're not going to explore as much as a 45 or a 55-year-old addict or a 35-year-old person that comes into a session for psychospiritual or therapeutic intentions. So the propensity for a young addict will be still to not want to delve into the reason why they became addicts. And so, they'll relapse.
So you're saying they're losing the integration process there. They're not integrating their work. Now, we all know that this medicine is pretty powerful with the healing of this opioid addiction. And I think the fentanyl gets involved in a little bit of a way that blocks a lot of that healing. Fentanyl is a really, really dangerous drug. So, but, you talked about flood doses and things of that nature. So can we talk a little bit about how you go about doing what you do?
Okay, sure. Thanks. So it's been like a process for me, and I'm working very differently now compared to during the first 25 years. Close to 3 years ago, I began to work with people in such a way that I spent hours over a period of many, many conversations on the phone with people during a few-week period, at least 3 weeks to 4 week period, prior to their 48-hour session. And what we're doing is we're clarifying two specific intentions, two things people want to explore and work through. And what I want them to accomplish before the session is to have these two specific themes so integrated into their being. It's like taking a pilgrimage within themselves, and it's a period. So we discuss these intentions. We invariably end up speaking about childhood experiences, mom and dad, their relationship, siblings, life experiences that reflect the reason why they're choosing these specific intentions, life traumas. And we just talk and talk. And then I give people a day or two or 4 days, and they reflect upon the conversation that we had. They reflect upon these intentions. They get clearer and clearer to hone in on these two specific intentions. And it's a process. And once they're in preparation, once they're ready to do the session, then it's like they don't have to think about it. It's like they can just quietly meditate on these two themes. And the intentions don't have to have like a beginning, a middle, an end sentence structured, through the mind. They're just like these themes that people will sit with. And when they go into the session, they just relax into exploring these intentions. And during that,
can we talk a little bit about what a session kind of is so people know and what they experience in that session a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So the session, a very gradual administering of iboga over a period of 6 to 7 hours. And first is a test dose, and all the iboga is calibrated very specifically according to body weight. So, a person that weighs 105, weighs 220, is actually receiving the same amount of medicine. It's very specifically encapsulated and calibrated according to body weight. And it's administered hour by hour. The amount is contingent upon the reaction of the medicine. Some people need less, and some people need more. More is not necessarily better, which more is better is the American way, but that's not the way it works with plant medicines.
Very true.
And I love the gradual protocol because then people can sip their own water, they can walk to the bathroom on their own. With flood doses, if a guy was 120 pounds, the guy had to crawl to the bathroom because a flood dose was just so incredibly intense. The other thing about a flood dose was that during the first few hours, there was hundreds and hundreds of pictorial gestalts and these archetypal vignettes, and a movie screen appears, and by the time you're wanting to focus on one particular frame because you want to explore it more deeply, it's already gone, and you've already passed 2 other frames. So the flood dose happened so fast and furious that it just seemed to be a really unnatural way of working. This way, go ahead. Yeah, you have no question.
I was going to ask you real quick. Now, when you're getting to that point, because we're getting to a pretty good subject here, when you're getting to that point where you need that flood dose, because with all these medicines, you have to go over that hump. Do you get those people to that hump?
Absolutely.
Flood dose. Gotcha.
Yeah, because the people are taking the same amount of iboga, and it's cumulative. So at a certain, it's like when I first came back from Africa with the first grams, literally the day that I came back was the day that a client of a friend of mine, therapist friend of mine, the client, 66-year-old Englishman who had a facial tic, dropped this out of print, this chapter from an out of print book by a therapist, a Chilean therapist by the name of Claudio Naranjo, in her lap. And the name of the chapter was Ibogaine, Fantasy and Reality. And Claudio Naranjo documented about 40 lower to mid-range dose directive interactive therapy sessions with Ibogaine, with Iboga. And it was so interesting and synchronistic because nobody knew that I was coming with Iboga. And here we had these ways to begin to explore the psychotherapeutic and the spiritual protocols. And over a period of a couple of years, me and a few people, mostly therapists, explored and created the therapeutic and the psychospiritual way to work with Iboga. We had some information, and I can get into this, but it'll take another hour, so I probably won't. But we had quite a bit of information about how to work with addiction-interruption, but we didn't have information as to how to work psychospiritually. So I say this because it's interesting, because that's the way I'm working more now. And over a period of 6 or 7 hours, the medicine is cumulative, so that people slip under the covers with their eyes closed in a non-linear condition, as if they had the medicine all at once, but it never feels like you're going 200 miles off of a cliff, but living to talk about it, which a lot of people really don't want to experience in their lives. And it's just not as productive as we thought, back in the olden days when, we were flood dosing. In fact, basically the Ibogaine world community is doing much more gradual protocols now anyway.
I think the whole medicine community in general is understanding this a lot more, because
is that right?
It is a process. This is a process. This whole medicine.
Right. And it blends into the integration process too. The thing that I'm really excited about is that people are beginning to experience. So what Ibogaine particularly does is what its forte is. Understand that ayahuasca opens the heart. What Ibogaine does is quiet the mind. There was one therapist that called me about 4 months after she did the session, and she said the main thing she got out of Iboga was that about 60% of the actual quantity of thoughts that are running through her mind per hour is gone. And she's able to be in a condition of presence. And especially, she found it really endearing that she can be with her clients more deeply, because her mind was much, much quieter. It seems that there's a bunch of extraneous file cabinets that are thrown out of the system as a result of taking Iboga. And very few people take Iboga more than 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. It's not something you do once a week, or once a month, or even once a year.
Yeah. None of these medicines are.
It's like you do. Well, I understood that some people do ayahuasca. I did a couple of brothers. One was a physician, and the other was a professor out in California. And they had done ayahuasca 53 and 72 times respectively. So, people do medicines a lot, but I haven't come across anyone that does Iboga a lot.
No. I don't think you really, I don't think you really can, Rich. And I think there's a lot of reasoning behind that. And, we're not doctors or physicians, but I think what I've heard, because I've never experienced the medicine, is it kind of erases your thoughts of your mind, and you kind of start over, all refreshed again, to give you kind of a new start. Am I explaining that well?
Exactly. And the key in integration is just to stay there. It's not to reconstruct the old sense of self. It's like, the way I see it is that Iboga, okay, let's see if I've got this rubber band ball. It's 1,000 rubber bands. And that's the way that we form falsely created a sense of self, a false sense of self, a separate sense of self. So during the Iboga session, all the bands completely relax, and to some degree, even psychologically, but energetically, you get to experience and to see all the interconnecting that falsely define the separate sense of self. And the only thing that's keeping us from freedom and from intrinsic joy, causeless joy, and peace and rest is this false sense of self that we've superimposed on top of what's already as as it should be. It's like we don't have to do anything. We don't have to cultivate any endearing qualities. They're already within us. We just have to get out of our own way so that they come forth naturally.
And I think that's what most of these medicines do. They try to get you out of your own way. And if you can get out of your own way, then you can start integrating this. And once you start integrating this, that's when your life changes. I mean, I had a good buddy of mine that just went, and there's a little bit of difference, and let's touch on that in a minute. What is the difference between Iboga and Ibogaine? Because I know Ibogaine right now is really being studied hard, government-wise, clinically-wise, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And Iboga is more underground.
Ibogaine is the isolated alkaloid. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's really used specifically for addiction-interruption. For one reason is that it adds more metabolite to the receptor sites. 36 hours after you take Ibogaine, there's a metabolite that doesn't wash out of the system for a long, long time. And that helps eliminate the craving for different substances. Iboga is a representation, to some degree, depending upon the medicine, it's a representation of the whole plant, or at least a few more of the active alkaloids. So the synergy between the active alkaloids. And that, I believe, from what I've seen, it helps people clarify and deepen the results of the intentions and what they really feel they need to explore and work through. So Iboga is more for the psycho-spiritual and the therapeutic sessions, and the Ibogaine hydrochloride is really best for the addiction interruption.
Gotcha. Now, about the addiction process, do you ever see this? I mean, we can just talk hypothetical. Do you ever see this going in like a 30-day kind of treatment center kind of program? This way to treat this addiction? I know. Why not, right? Why not?
Yeah. Because when I first came back from Africa, I thought, there should be a room in every VA hospital in the entire country. There should be a center on every American Indian piece of land, And, now that it's plant medicines are becoming decriminalized and, little, Santa Cruz and places throughout the country, I'm sure that there's going to be centers in the United States opening up now and making these medicines more available.
You touched on one thing, vets. I was going to say something a little bit earlier. We just had a whole bunch of our buddies go through a program out of Stanford that went down to Mexico, they went down to the jungle, and they did a beautiful study. They came back, they did their brainwaves, they went down there, they were all completely dead, come back, lit up like Christmas trees. These boys all of them. Now they went back for their second one, came back again, even more. I mean, it just reinforces people like Stanford. All these other schools all these other facilities are starting to study all these medicines because they work.
Finally, after 50 years,
they're
being taken off the shelf. And 50 years, 1970.
I think Nixon did that, but we'll talk. That's another whole different subject. But, I mean, these medicines, and we all know these clinical studies going on now. I know we don't want to really get into a lot of those, but I think it just goes again to just show what I said earlier. It shows the reinforce of these medicines and what they do for us and how they can actually change our thoughts and our processes. But this medicine, especially with the addiction, why do you think it is so powerful? Why do you think that this
Well,
medicine has an effect?
it's a
Just
mystery to
your
me.
opinion.
It's it's
Yeah.
the granddaddy. It's such a long process. It's a 36-hour session, and so it just overwhelms the symptoms of withdrawal. I mean, there is a miracle to Ibogaine when it comes to addiction interruption, which is the only thing on the planet that places a person into a pre-addictive state and resets the biochemistry as if they've been in some rehab for a year and a half. I mean, people,
Yeah.
I mean, they could be kayaking 3,000 hours after they've done Ibogaine, coming off of 2 grams of heroin. I mean, it's just incredible.
Right.
Not to say that it's not a cure, it's not a magic bullet, because there's so much work to be done after that. And as a result of particularly young people feeling so empowered afterwards, it's like I can do anything, I'm free. And that's also part of their downfall.
And
So,
you talk to a
there's
lot of you talk to a lot of young people. What is it their biggest fear? What is their biggest fear? Probably come
if
to
it's
this
if it's a
medicine.
guy, the biggest fear is their dad. And if it's what is their biggest fear,
Mhm.
going inside is
Yeah.
the biggest fear. It's
Yeah.
not only young people, but all of us.
Yeah, I probably categorized that wrong because we all have that fear. Even though we've done this medicine so many times, different types, different kinds, it's always that fear
Yeah,
of
I
going
want to just
inside.
mention something specifically about Iboga.
Sure, sure.
There's a very strong. It's very mental, the experience itself, and so basically a movie screen appears, and a person gets to see an unleashing of its memories, but the Iboga is not going to show you anything that you are not willing to explore, and that's where the hours of intention and the preparation comes into play. If you want to have a complete discontinuous break with the past, if you want to have like a life transformative experience, that can happen when you do Iboga. It could actually happen without Iboga when you're walking across the street chewing a piece of gum. That could happen. It could be of your intention, and it's the person. It's not the method. It's not the Iboga or the ayahuasca.
Those
You
can
know,
definitely be the
it's not.
catalyst. They can definitely be
Yes,
the
they can be.
catalyst. So for some of us,
That's
for
right.
some of
There,
us,
there are a few powerful methodologies on the planet, and these are a few of them. But
yes.
there's a very strong witness component when it comes to Ibogaine, and I think, and if you go into any of the scriptures, they talk about the witness, and the witness is where the healing happens within the Iboga session. So what's happening is the movie screen appears, and you get to see all this unfolding of life experiences and these archetypal vignettes, and you're right, clearly you're not emotionally involved with these experiences. You're basically identifying with the one that's watching. And I think the fact that there's the one that's watching is being identified with is where the healing takes
Because
place.
you're being the observer almost. You're being the
And that's where the
witness.
healing takes place. You don't have to
Mhm.
change anything except identify with the one, and
Mhm.
then the story doesn't have that it used to have. And people come out of an Iboga session just free,
I guess because
free of those stories.
maybe I'm just assuming this because I've never done. Maybe it's because you're accepting that story after so long.
Acceptance
Could
is
that?
the key. And the Iboga, yeah, the method of witness creates the situation where you're neither running towards or running away from the belief or the story.
Mhm.
And as long as Buddha said, it's not thoughts that are the problem. What's the problem is that we don't watch them as they come, watch them as they're present, and watch them as they go. That's the problem. And Iboga enables people to have that identification with the witness, and then through the integration process that we go through afterwards, they remain as deeply as possible in that condition of acceptance. And you know, it's interesting, but I say to people, even if you leave 3% of who you thought you were out of that bed, if you come up letting go of 3%, if you take an airplane and it's by 3% in 6 months, it's going to be in a completely different place in the world that it was supposed to be. You know, 3% is a lot. If you take that much out, you know, I see people's life being completely changed to the better. You know, 3 months, 6 months, a year later, it's like being introduced to a new language. It's the beginning of a process, and the integration is really cool, important to continue.
It is so cool. It is integration. I mean, you said it. It's pretty cool when you learn to do it and when you understand what it really is.
And then getting the confirmation that, like, you're not needing to reflect upon an experience that you had yesterday. You're taking that of presence with you wherever you go. And it's somewhat confusing and disconcerting sometimes, because living in a condition of not knowing is very new to people. To me, like, confusion is highly underrated. Confusion is a really good thing, and it indicates that there's a breaking up of the way in which we've been defining ourselves. And so this is
perspective. Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah. So this is what we go through during the conversations that we have for days and weeks thereafter.
Amazing. These medicines are amazing. And, you know, I think one of the biggest things that you touched on that really I think about too the most, especially with Ibogaine, is how it clears that mind for you, how it just clears those old files out and replaces
it's really extraordinary. Yeah. And I even know of some people that are integrating ayahuasca with Iboga, because Ibogaine quiets the mind, ayahuasca opens the heart, and within a few weeks of each other, it's a really interesting integration process.
You know, we're talking about these medicines lately in the past few years, very openly and very honestly, and with a lot of education now, I think, with people like you and just so many people out there that will experience these healing benefits. And this education is what we need, having people like you on board to just show and talk and discuss of your path and where you've been. It's so important.
I appreciate the
So important. And you know what? Really great talking to you tonight. You're a very informative, man. You know,
thanks.
I think we'll end it here. But you know, Rich, we can read Richie at IBeginAgain, right? .org.
Again, without the I begin again is one word. Yeah, IBeginAgain.org. Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And you know what, Rich? We'll be talking again soon. It was wonderful having you tonight. I think you've taught a lot of people a lot of things, and you know what? We'll be talking soon.
Cool.
Ciao, brother.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right.